The Chinese military surrounded Taiwan. China has encircled the island with warships and fighter jets. Is this China's last rehearsal before the final act? Are we inching closer to the dreaded Taiwan war, or is there a hidden meaning in these war games? Is the blockade of Taiwan meant to deter the United States? Let's start off with what we know so far. China has carried out mock airstrikes, mock sea strikes. This has mostly been around Taiwan's Kinmen and Matsu Islands. Let's pull out a map for you and show you where these islands exactly are. China has sent heavily armed warplanes in the skies near Taiwan. The drills began this morning at 7:45 a.m. local time. It's meant to go on for 2 days. China is calling this drill a punishment. For whom, you ask? Taiwan, obviously. But what for? Separatist acts, says Beijing. You see, in Taiwan, President Lai Ching-te has just been inaugurated. In his inauguration speech on Monday, Lai called on China to stop threatening Taiwan, and Beijing clearly did not take that well. The drills, you see, are a response. China says the drills are, quote-unquote, fully justified and necessary. But are they really? The Chinese state broadcaster is celebrating the drills as a, quote-unquote, powerful disciplinary action. You don't need me to tell you that this is a clear provocation. What you have here is China flexing its muscle. The dragon is trying to show Taiwan what it is actually capable of, how it can cut off Taiwan from the rest of the world, seize control of its airspace, the surrounding waters, block Taiwan's business, even its energy imports. In fact, the state broadcaster CCTV in its coverage said the drills were partly aimed at rehearsing an economic blockade of the island. Taiwan, as you know, is the world's leading semiconductor supplier. How has Taiwan reacted? Taiwan's new leader, Lai Ching-te, has said that he will do what it takes to defend Taiwan.
I will stand on the front line with all the brothers and sisters from the National Army to defend the national peace together.
This is Kinmen. This Taiwanese island is a stone throw away from China. Like you can see on your screen, one can literally see the Chinese skyline from Kinmen. During the second Taiwan Strait conflict, Kinmen was among the worst hit, by the way. On the 23rd of August, 1958, Chinese troops attacked Kinmen. There was heavy artillery shelling for 44 days. Taiwan says it lost 439 soldiers, 80 civilians, which also explains the anti-landing spikes on the beaches of Kinmen. But today, as the Chinese military rehearses the blockade of Taiwan, the people in Kinmen are calm. And why do you think that is? Is it their confidence in Taiwanese defense, or is there more?
It might be just a threat. They have been talking about it for 20-30 years. If a war is bound to happen, if they plan to attack, they would have struck 20-30 years ago.
And what do you make of such sentiment? Does China really not plan to attack Taiwan? Of course, there are these drills. Chinese President Xi Jinping has time and again said that China will be reunified with Taiwan. In 2019, he also went a step ahead and said that Beijing will use force if necessary. What if this is all meant to blockade the US from Taiwan and not Taiwan? What if attacking Taiwan was never part of Xi Jinping's plan? In December 2023, the Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden met at San Francisco. Do you know what Xi Jinping told Biden? That China would prefer taking Taiwan peacefully, not by force. Xi Jinping also said that American analysts were wrong in predicting that China would wage a war on Taiwan by 2025 or 2027. The Chinese president simply said that Beijing has set no such timeline. Beijing views Taiwan as a part of China. You know, one country, two systems. Even the United Nations does not recognize Taiwan as a separate country. Same with the United States. Washington switched its diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China in 1979. Back to the question, does China really want to wage a war against Taiwan? Experts believe Xi Jinping does not want to risk being seen as a leader waging a war against his own people. Number two, a war against Taiwan will be devastating for the island's business. Like we told you, Taiwan is a semiconductor exporter. China, of all the countries, understands the importance of semiconductors. After all, Beijing is betting big on technology. So what really are these drills all about? Are they meant to blockade American presence in the waters around Taiwan? Do you know when was the last time China announced such a drill? It was last August, right after Lai, who was then the vice president, stopped over in the US on his way to Paraguay. The US is Taiwan's most important ally, by the way. It is also Taiwan's supplier of military hardware. Time and again, the US President Joe Biden has vowed to defend Taiwan should China invade the island. The US, as you already know, is not China's best friend. Last year in April, China was once again seen practicing the blockade of Taiwan. It was right after Taiwan's then president, Tsai Ing-wen, met then US House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California. And back to the question, are these drills meant to blockade the US? The latest comment of the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson only adds weight to this theory.
We urge the United States to stop condoning and supporting the forces for Taiwan independence and interfering in China's internal affairs. Any act that jeopardizes China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity will be met with a resolute and forceful response from the Chinese side.
What happened aboard the Singapore Airlines flight from London has triggered a series of questions that we must not stop asking. Do airlines and civil aviation authorities need to revise the rules of flying? Because what happened to the Singapore Airlines flight was unusual. One moment the plane was at cruising altitude and the next moment it was shaking. Soon the plane dropped 6,000 feet. A passenger died. 30 others were injured. 20 remain in the ICU. It's scary to say the least. Singapore Airlines says it is investigating the cause of extreme turbulence and we wait for the result of the probe. But in the meantime, we must tell you that this is the new normal, it seems. Incidents of turbulence are increasing around the world. And why does turbulence happen? Mostly because of strong winds. Turbulence is expected when a flight is ascending or descending. It's very common. And it's why it is mandatory to keep your seat belts on during takeoff and landing. But the Singapore Airlines flight was hit by turbulence at cruising height. That is when the seatbelt signs are off. People are walking around the cabin. What explains turbulence at such a height? Sometimes at a higher altitude, a plane is hit by turbulence because it is flying close to another aircraft. Turbulence is also common near mountain ranges or at the edges of the jet streams. Then you have clear air turbulence. It's dangerous because, as the name suggests, clear air turbulence cannot be seen. It is undetectable. It does not show up on the weather radar. So the pilots sitting in the flight deck do not know what's approaching them unless another flight in front of them has experienced severe turbulence and reported it. What often causes clear air turbulence is when warmer air rises into cooler air. A study published in 2023 reports a rise in clear air turbulence. What's the reason? Climate change. If that be the reason, then what's stopping safety guidelines from changing with the changing climate? If severe turbulence at cruising height is the new normal, shouldn't rules change as well, keeping in mind this new normal? Let's start by asking passengers to keep their seatbelts fastened at all times. I know it's inconvenient, but it's safe. Of course, that is what the flight safety protocol suggests, to keep the seatbelt on at all times. But making this mandatory is what we are suggesting. We know that pilots switch on the seatbelt signs when they expect turbulence, but clear air turbulence, like we mentioned, cannot be detected. One passenger traveling in the London-Singapore flight said the people on board did not receive any warning before the plane dropped thousands of feet. This passenger and his wife were thrown out of their seats, by the way. They went on to hit the ceiling. Their son was thrown on the floor. The passenger said some people who were walking around the cabin when the turbulence hit started doing somersaults. Another said people did not have the seatbelts on at that time. While some did put them on, those who could not or did not were thrown around the cabin. A third passenger said, and I'm quoting here, "I saw people from across the aisle going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and landing back down in like awkward position. People chipped their tooth. Some got a cut in their eye. People found themselves on the floor bleeding." What happened on that Singapore Airlines flight is an eye-opener. It calls for going back to the drawing board. Perhaps improving the quality of our seat belts as well. They have remained the same for the last couple of decades, after all. There is a need perhaps for some manufacturing rethinking as extreme turbulence becomes the new normal. Can manufacturers do something to ensure that the overhead storage bins do not open in such situations and heavy bags can be stopped from falling on passengers? Reports say that in the Singapore Airlines flight, the passengers who were in the washrooms were among those who were injured the worst. Can manufacturers make the flight washrooms safer? Like I said, we need to go back to the drawing room. What can be done immediately, though, is the change in the seatbelt policy for all flights, and definitely for some flight routes that are more turbulent than others. The route between Santiago and Santa Cruz is considered the world's most turbulent route, followed by Almaty-Bishkek, Lanzhou-Chengdu, Centrair-Sendai. The route between Milan and Geneva is the fifth most turbulent route in the world. In 2017, a study predicted that clear air turbulence may be 4 times as common by 2050. It means authorities must act now in order to avoid more loss of life in turbulent flights. And for you, it means next time, think twice before complaining about fastening your seatbelt. If you are watching the show from North India, I know the heat is unbearable. It's almost too hot to function, with the mercury levels making lives miserable. And I have bad news, by the way. With the IMD, or the India Meteorological Department, issuing a red alert for parts of Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, Chandigarh, Delhi and West Uttar Pradesh. Severe heat wave conditions expected, with temperatures likely to exceed 47 degrees in several areas. Now, for those who may be unaware, quantitatively, heat wave is defined based on the temperature thresholds over a region in terms of actual temperature or its departure from normal. And what's a red alert? It refers to an extreme heat warning. It means that a severe heat wave has persisted for more than 2 days, or the total number of heat or severe heat wave days has been more than 6 days. As per the IMD, there is a very high likelihood of developing heat illness and heat stroke in all ages. I will in just a bit tell you what you can do to protect yourself. Speaking of how hot it really is in the national capital, how prepared is Delhi really to deal with the heat? Let's face it, it houses the Parliament of India, the Supreme Court, the President's House, so on and so forth. Are these high temperatures sustainable? Also, by the way, let me tell you what a World Bank report says. India could account for 34 million of the projected 80 million global job losses from heat stress associated productivity decline by 2030. Yes, heat stress associated productivity decline. Let's also tell you what a report by the McKinsey Global Institute says. With 75% of the workers in India experiencing heat-related stress, lost labor from rising heat and humidity could result in a loss of up to 4.5% of India's gross domestic product by the end of this decade. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, how can you protect yourself from heat waves? These are some of the things that you can do. Minimize outdoor activities. That's most important, particularly between noon and 3 p.m., since that is when the sun is at its peak. Also, drinking water regularly is very important, even if you don't feel thirsty. And try and opt for breathable and loose clothing while going out. Protect yourself perhaps by wearing hats and carry umbrellas and sunglasses if possible. Also, increase your intake of hydrating drinks. And if someone, unfortunately, gets a heat stroke, move them to a cool and shady area immediately. Remember, heat stroke is a medical emergency, so the affected person must be taken to the nearest health facility for urgent medical attention. Apply wet clothes and pour water on their body to reduce the temperature. Offer them with ORS, lemon juice, electrolytes, or other hydrating fluids. Meanwhile, speaking of the heat, let me tell you this. As part of a competition in the UK, school children offered their best one-liners. You know what the winning joke was? What's the hottest area in the classroom? And wait till you hear the answer. The corner, because it's 90 degrees. You get it? Now, the heat crisis is no joke, of course, but I hope that this one made you laugh.